Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, June 8th, 2021. Time for, another one of these shows, the Kagro in the Morning radio show. That's actually what we call it. It's what happens. It's very self-descriptive. It's a very simple and straightforward title. You see, well, what's going on today? I thought maybe, being that we were here in Virginia, we would ask a guy in Maine, what are we doing today? And then he would answer, and then we would read the answer, and then we'd see what we could do about fulfilling that wish. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live. Look, it says here, Kagro X, that's me, says we can talk about Joe Manchin today, or pants. I mean, that's it. That's basically it. Those are the two options. Manchin or pants. Anything else? No. Sorry. Just zip it. Unless you're, of course, talking about the pants with no zipper. You can't zip those. This is all right. And largely correct. There are some other things happening today. People are pretending there's news or trying to create news. I guess we're all still waiting on the Supreme Court, maybe for some more major decisions. I think they'll probably happen right in the middle of our show and ruin everything. Or perhaps wait until after and make it even worse. But for what we anticipate hearing about, we can check in a little later with Joan McCarter, who is watching several of those cases. I'm sure we're still waiting, apparently, on a possible decision, and I guess it's got to have been made by now, and that's part of the mystery, is why we haven't heard about their decision on the latest and probably most egregious suit to make it to the Supreme Court, which really should never have made it to the Supreme Court, about the Affordable Care Act. But you would have thought we would have heard about that one by now. We've heard decisions in cases that were argued after that one. And, we'll save that just in case that's something that Joan wants to bring us up to speed to. Or maybe there'll be some fun developments or some horrific developments on that front by the time she gets around. And in the meantime, we can catch you up on a number of other things which are happening, some of which feel newsworthy, some of which involve news-like words. For instance, I see Armando is up in arms this morning about a Lester Holt interview of Vice President Kamala Harris, in which he asks twice, for some reason, inside of the space of 5 minutes, why she hasn't physically, I guess, as Vice President, visited the border area, and essentially gone to the same spot that Republicans have been visiting over the past couple of weeks and months to get photo ops of themselves at the border, whether it's Republicans riding in gunboats along the Rio Grande, even though there's nobody trying to cross there or whatever. Not really sure. And essentially he gives the game away in saying, I don't understand why you haven't been to the border, given that Republicans are demanding that you go to the border. It's like, well, who's doing this interview, Lester, you or the Republicans? I don't really understand what your question is. I've been working on the immigration issue, and you might not believe it, but a lot of immigration issues arise away from the border itself. And going to a border region and standing around and asking questions of people who have no answers about the questions that we want to get to, the policy level questions, doesn't really do anything. But I guess he puts the question again and again, and I'm sure it's rather frustrating. And that's the morning's discussion so far on what's happening. People anticipating word from the Supreme Court. People, Armando and probably others growing frustrated with Lester Holt's interview, also making the rounds. And this, I think it should have been more interesting, but it's just not. Apparently, the Senate Rules Committee has issued a report investigating the failures of the, I guess, the security apparatus on January 6th, answering none of my questions, of course, about security on January 6th. My questions, of course, are about White House security on January 6th. And many people very interested in the report and dissecting it, and Scott MacFarlane has spent his morning on it. NBC News 4, that's the local NBC affiliate here in Washington, D.C., their investigative reporter who's digging into the report. Honestly, I don't know. I haven't read. Well, maybe we should start by reading through what he has to say about it, because there's no way I'm reading through the report. Certainly not this early in the morning. And I got to tell you, from what I've seen, it largely falls in the no crap zone here. That's what I'd be filing under if we were more into violating the FEC rules or FCC rules that don't even apply to us on the show. You might even go with the no S Sherlock phrasing on this one. Honestly, I mean, the Capitol Hill police didn't prepare adequately for what they should have known could have been a much more serious, if not, if they couldn't anticipate the level of violence, they should have been aware that a mass demonstration with a lot of angry and stupid people was going to be there at Capitol Hill, but they weren't. And the military didn't respond very quickly, and there's lots of questions as to why, and the chain of command this and yada yada that, but honestly no answers as to, well, why were they so woefully underprepared? And my question, of course, why was there no security response 2 miles away at the White House when the second, third, and fourth in line to the presidency were being evacuated by the Secret Service under threat of death? But that's for a larger commission, I suppose. But even then, I'm not wild about the investigation idea, the commission idea. I mean, I think they should just go straight to the prosecutions. The FBI seems to be doing a reasonable job rounding people up. They're probably not, though, doing a very good job in working their way up the chain and bringing the backers and inciters of the insurrection to justice, because that's just not really what they do unless they're organized crime figures, which in this case they are, but what can I tell you? They are on television, and so therefore we can't prosecute them. Anyway, Scott MacFarlane has been digging into it. The basics of what he's parsed out of the report is what's making news and news conversation this morning, so we're just going to have to include that in our roundup. He writes it up this way in a short-ish series of tweets. Senate Rules Committee investigation on the failures of January 6th shows a series of mistakes that exposed officers. Yes, I know. Failure by Capitol Police Intelligence Division to convey warning that people were sharing maps of the Capitol online ahead of January 6th. That illustrated with a side-by-side of, I don't know, maybe a photo from... I don't know if the report has photos. They're not preparing these reports for Donald Trump anymore, so they might not be photo illustrated. But picture of police dealing with the rioters the best they can, given that they have no riot gear at the time, which is amazing also, given that, yes, they have riot gear at the Capitol Police Department. Yes, pretty much every major metropolitan police department has got riot gear, and they wear it so often and so inappropriately whenever there are, say, Black Lives Matter marchers protesting, and couldn't find it on the day that all the white people showed up to threaten the Capitol with violence. Anyway, MacFarlane goes on to say the Senate report says some of the officers had to fight back against insurrectionists in their daily uniforms without riot gear or helmets. The report reiterates a troubling finding from earlier this year, which is to say, again, no crap. We already know this. Riot gear was where? Locked in a bus nearby, and officers couldn't get into the bus or into the gear. And I don't know. I don't think that the report, there's a highlighted section here. You tell me if the report tells us anything about why that happened or just tells us that it happened. Here's the highlighted portion. United States Capitol Police leadership also failed to provide frontline officers with effective protective equipment or training although USCP activated 7 Specialty Civil Disturbance Unit, or CDU, platoons in advance of the joint session, only 4 of those platoons were outfitted with special protective equipment, including helmets, hardened plastic armor, and shields. The many other USCP officers who fought to defend the Capitol were left to do so in their daily uniforms. Many of those frontline officers had not received training in basic civil disturbance tactics since their initial recruit officer class training. While some CDU officers were issued special protective equipment, the platoons were not authorized to wear the equipment at the beginning of their shifts. Instead, USCP staged equipment on buses near the Capitol. In at least one instance, when the platoon attempted to retrieve the equipment, the bus was locked, leaving the platoon without access to this critical equipment. USCP also failed to provide equipment, blah, 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 blah. It goes on, but that's the end of the page. Okay, I mean, Scott McFarlane is working with what he's got here, but hey, did you know that a lot of officers on the Capitol Police Force weren't wearing riot gear? Yes, I saw it on January 6th. Did you know that was because they couldn't get to their riot gear? Yeah, I found that out in February or later in January when they basically told the local reporters, hey, and they asked, why weren't you wearing riot gear? It was locked on a bus. Now, 6 months later, the Senate Rules Committee tells me what I read in the newspaper back in January. So awesome. And makes me so hopeful that if we fight our way through the filibuster roadblock thrown up by Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, we could possibly have gotten to a commission which 6 months from now would tell us that all the riot gear was locked in the bus and that was a bad thing. Honestly, I don't hold out a great deal of hope for investigations on Capitol Hill or even outside commissions on this. Just needs to be criminal investigation at this point. I don't know. I guess I'm thinking, pardon me, about getting the wrong kind of information from this. This is really an internal look at what happened on the congressional side of this, not who did what in terms of perpetrating the violence on January 6th. And this was never supposed to be that. So I guess the juicy details were never going to be produced by this report. But I guess because it has something to do with January 6th, we're waving it around as though some, long lingering questions are going to be answered. And that's just not what this thing is. But because it's occupying a lot of the volume, I guess, of our space for discussion, I thought I would take a look at it. But to me, this is kind of a non-story at this point. Let's see. McFarlane goes on to say that this passage in the Senate investigation is striking. We'll see. Of USCP's 1,840 sworn officers, only approximately 160 are trained in advanced civil disturbance tactics and use of hard, that's in scare quotes there, hard protective equipment. Fewer than 10 are trained to use USCP's full suite of less than lethal munitions. I guess that sounds like being underprepared. A shocking development that we'll certainly have to remedy in the future. Okay. Senate report says the U.S. Capitol Police Board didn't understand how to call for help on January 6th. Unacceptable, we are informed by Scott McFarlane. I don't know if that's his personal judgment on that or the conclusion of the Rules Committee. The board operates with no transparency, no open meetings, no FOIA, no disclosure, yet appears not to know fully what it's doing. It oversees a police department with arrest power, and yet, I guess, has no clear procedures for calling for help. The quoted passage here, Capitol Police Board members in charge on January 6th did not fully understand the statutory or regulatory requirements for requesting assistance from executive agencies and departments or declaring emergencies. Capitol Police Board members also disagreed as to whether unanimity was required to approve this request. Well, those are certainly things that ought to be straightened out and, maybe written down and put on a page, laminated, and 3-hole punched and put into a binder and shelved somewhere for quick reference. I mean, bad, but again, I want to know who we can arrest for this, and that's not really an arresting offense. I want to know who did the violence. Department of Defense, the sluggish response, of course, was informed by criticism, it says, that it received for its response to racial justice protests in D.C. in June, including that low-hanging or low-hovering helicopter. Yes, that's a semi-legitimate sort of area for discussion, is that the police forces locally were heavily criticized, and I think rightly so, for their response to the Black Lives Matter protests and post-George Floyd murder protests. And I guess they're trying to say that the lesson they took away from it was that we should be more hands-off with protesters. Which, you know, I can see why people would come to that conclusion, but it's an awfully simple-minded conclusion. The reason that the criticism was there for your response to the BLM protesters is that they were largely peaceful and presented no serious threat to the, well, let's say the continuation of any of the branches of the government. Whereas if people come and say, hi, we're here to hang Mike Pence, and they build a gallows and then start smashing windows to try to get into the Capitol while the joint session is counting the electoral college votes, I don't know. I guess a good area of inquiry might be, why don't we have officers and higher-ups and board members who are capable of discerning between these two situations? They're all presumably college-educated. I mean, could we look at underlying factors and the state of education in the country? Well, I think that would be a little bit far afield, but it might pay to ask people why, you know, it's so difficult for you to differentiate between these two situations and make a real decision on the fly about what to do. McFarland, winding up here, I think, this is painful to read, he says, especially for the families who live on Capitol Hill. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser called the U.S. Army Secretary at 1:34 p.m. to report things getting, believe it or not, quote, out of control. Pentagon finally deployed the D.C. National Guard at 5:04 p.m. So, I mean, again, famously reiterating how sluggish response was from the military, and we all have theories about why that might be. Some perhaps include the fact that Mike Flynn's brother, is it Charles Flynn, was apparently in the chain of command in making that decision. And I did see, by the way, the last couple of days that he's been given a new assignment. He's now taking command of U.S. Pacific Command, which sounds like a fairly sizable promotion. I don't know where Pacific Command is based or where he'll be, or whether he's in charge of the entirety of Pacific Command or some specific aspect of it, but I guess things aren't like they are at the end of Stripes, where the captain gets sent to the Arctic Command after that debacle. But unless we can reassign him to Space Force and launch him to the moon or something, I guess maybe that's as far away from Washington, D.C. as you could put him, given his level of seniority in the Pentagon. Let's see, there's a little bit more here. McFarland continues on for a few more tweets. Let's see if there's anything else here. The Senate report on January 6th recommends Capitol Police improve preparations of a quick reaction force for special events. That seems like a good idea. That's ironic, he says, because the Oath Keepers, of course, are accused of detailed planning of their own quick reaction force, staged with actual weapons for a second wave if Trump invoked the Insurrection Act. You remember we discussed yesterday when we were talking with Greg the importance of the Insurrection Act to people inside the Trump circle who were all first considering invoking the Insurrection Act in June of 2020 in response to the Black Lives Matter protests in Lafayette Square outside of the White House, and then that then became a key, essentially a key triggering word for Oath Keepers on January 6th, who fully believed that the Insurrection Act would somehow be invoked on January 6th in a way that would deputize them to storm the Capitol on behalf of President Trump. Well, anyway, it gets another mention, and so I guess the story holds at this point. The Senate report also puts the failures of the U.S. Capitol Police leadership on January 6th in context. The agency had a ton of money. Its 2021 funding, a total of $515 million, which is nearly as much as the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police, the police for the entirety of the city as opposed to just the Capitol complex. The D.C. Metropolitan Police, of course, have twice as many officers and an enormous city and range of crimes to police. And then finally, with some exclamation points here, even before the sentence begins, this passage from the Senate investigation of January 6th is powerful, very powerful. We'll see what sort of ideas he has about the power of these things. A cook from the Senate carry-out lunch counter brought water to officers on the front lines to help them clear chemical spray from their eyes. And look what an officer reported finding in the halls later. And I got to tell you, I actually took the look at this one, and I am, like, But I fail to see the power of it, but okay. A light-duty officer in a suit from the Capitol Division, somebody who might be at a front desk somewhere, came up to me at the triage site on the Capitol Visitor Center landing and asked how he could help. I told him that we needed bottles of water in a bad way for rinsing eyes out. I figured he would go back to the detail where there was a pile of bottles of water, I guess, or of cases of bottles. But he instead went to the Senate carryout and returned with a few cases of water being carried by him and the Senate carryout cook. Still wearing his white apron and paper hat, they brought us smart water. Seriously expensive stuff, which might be considered something of a waste, but all right. Another officer stated that he saw officers responding to save members and staff in offices. Saw many officers get sprayed with irritants and saw officers standing in the way of the bloodthirsty mob to prevent them from achieving their goals. Describing the aftermath of that day, another officer recounted, I wandered around the building for a little bit, looking at the wreckage and trying to take everything in before people cleaned up. Doors and windows were broken. I know. It had been barricaded with furniture and display cases. I know. Saw the pictures. There was broken glass, trash, banners, and signs. Yes. I went down to the lower west terrace through the tunnel, and it was just trashed. Now, this is sort of interesting what was on the floor here. Knives, baseball bats, flagpoles, banners, CDU shields. I think those are the riot shields that they stole from the cops. Body armor, pants, socks, shoes, hats, uniform items, jackets, wallets, cash, phones, flags, and signs littered the ground. Everything was covered in white from the tear gas, and I could still smell the pepper spray. And that's actually it. I mean, it sounds bad and everything, but I guess I'm lacking. Maybe I'm lacking in empathy to understand the power of the passage. I know doors and windows were broken. I saw. I know they were barricaded with furniture and display cases. I saw. Of course, there was broken glass. We saw it. Yes, there was trash, banners and signs, and this is interesting too. There were, among the many things lying on the ground, there were, just by way of pointing this out, the banners and signs, flagpoles, banners, flags, and signs. They get mentioned over and over again. There's other stuff in between there, and I guess that's the stuff you want to raise your eyebrows at. Knives, lots of claims, of course, that all the protesters were unarmed. That's not the extent of it. They actually did seize a few guns off of protesters directly that day, plus, of course, tasers and stun guns and the like. Lots of bear spray and chemical irritants. And, of course, their favorite trick, these protesters, is bringing flags on flagpoles and then, ditching the actual flag part and then just beating people with the flagpoles. Or even worse, stapling their flags to baseball bats and saying, this isn't a baseball bat, it's my flagpole, and how dare you desecrate the flag, even though it's a Trump flag, and it doesn't make any sense to worry about desecrating it. And the idea has always, all along, been to then tear the flag off, or leave it on for that matter, and beat people with the baseball bat / flagpole. Which, I've been at a loss to understand why police departments around the country have been allowing that since the beginning. We've complained about it a number of times, and it has come back to bite them. Now, knives, that's not so good. Then again, the baseball bats and flagpoles, banners, which we say 10 times. The shields that they stole from cops, again, surprising, but I saw it. Body armor, unclear whether that was stolen from police or body armor that people brought with them. Because again, you wonder why you're allowing people to assemble in body armor and other makeshift armors. And I guess I'm surprised to find pants, socks, shoes, and hats, and uniform items and jackets, which really kind of goes under clothing. Wallets and cash, I guess I'm surprised that got left behind too, because why would you leave any of that behind? But it could fall out of your pockets. I don't know what else to say, but other than that, I don't know. I guess I'm just failing to recognize the power that Scott McFarlane sees in this thing. And I don't know. It feels like, I don't mean to waste your time with the thing, but I guess I'm just astonished at how non-astonishing any of this stuff is. And although the purpose of the report was probably certainly never to give me what I wanted out of an investigation of January 6th, hey, congratulations on spending the time of the Senate Rules Committee compiling news reports. They took testimony, and I'm sure that was nice and probably felt good for the police officers, and that's actually kind of an important thing. But I don't know. Other than that, I guess I haven't learned a great deal, but Scott McFarlane is well and truly moved. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Plenty more to sort through. I don't know, I kind of thought that was surprising. And that maybe that was sort of weird that we were on tenterhooks, I guess, for this report. And maybe we just misunderstood what it was supposed to be about. Or, I don't know. I feel like somebody has to parse the thing. But maybe McFarlane thought there was going to be more to it. Or maybe he was just truly moved to find out, I guess, compiled all in one place, the various details about how underprepared the Capitol Police were. That's a story in itself, but I don't know. I find it unsurprising and certainly a little bit unsatisfying at this stage of the game. Other things, though, worthy of mention. This another confounding report about the, I guess what is ostensibly the Biden Justice Department taking odd positions, let's say, on behalf of the government in various legal actions in which the government is involved. In this case, Politico's report will lean on this one from Josh Gerstein, reporting that the Biden Justice Department, currently having taken over from the Trump Justice Department, continues in its position. And this is something that happens from administration to administration. It takes some time and some doing to get the Justice Department to change positions on things, and it very often feels institutionally constrained in changing positions on things like this. Ready for this one? The Biden Justice Department defends Trump in suit over rape denial. The new administration, the subheader says, is pressing on with a controversial stance in a defamation case brought by writer E. Jean Carroll. You remember her claims, of course, and in case you don't, it's all summed up here. The Biden administration is pressing on with a controversial Justice Department defense of President Donald Trump in a defamation lawsuit brought by a writer who accused him of raping her at a New York City department store in the 1990s. The brief, filed on Monday night with a federal appeals court, is an illustration of how administrations of sharply different political outlooks often flock to the same legal positions in court, even if it means seeming to excuse or immunize alleged bad conduct by their predecessors. Again, the most basic explanation of things like this is that the Justice Department views their task at preserving maximum power and flexibility for the executive branch at all times and more or less at all costs. The idea usually being that while you may think you've got a former president perhaps dead to rights on some bad behavior that really shouldn't be defended, letting your guard down or allowing a suit to go forward without vigorously defending the rights and prerogatives of the executive branch, whoever the current occupant or former occupant may be, is leaving the door open for, perhaps bad actors in the future to take the same action against you. If you, in other words, stand out of the way of the Carroll suit for defamation against the then sitting president, you leave the door open for Judicial Watch to sue Biden later on for defamation if he were to somehow vehemently disagree with one of the positions he was taking. And although you could probably differentiate between the situations when the time comes, the strategy usually is you defend it as aggressively as possible so that the maximum strength and flexibility are available to you in the future. If the tables are turned and a bad actor is seeking some sort of to exact some sort of penalty against the executive, and you have every tool at your disposal to dispense with them. But yeah, sometimes it means doing things like this, and sometimes it's not a particularly good policy. Anyway, we'll continue on with the report here. In the filing with the New York-based Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, the Justice Department insisted that it was not endorsing Trump's conduct toward the writer, E. Jean Carroll, even as it argued that a law governing suits against federal officials justified the government's move to take over the former president's defense in the case. In making and defending a Westfall Act certification, the Department of Justice is not endorsing the allegedly tortious conduct or representing that it actually furthered the interests of the United States, nor is a reviewing court making any such determinations in upholding the department's certification. The acting head of the Justice Department's Civil Division, Brian Boynton, wrote in a new submission. Boynton also adhered to the stance the Justice Department adopted in the case last September that Trump was, get this, acting in the course of his official duties as president when he denied Carroll's rape allegations from more than 2 decades ago. Okay, but I think given the particular way in which he did it, I think is what's most offensive to most people here. Speaking to the public and the press on matters of, gotta stop the snoozed alarm here for some reason. Speaking to the public and the press on matters of public concern is undoubtedly part of an elected official's job, Boynton added. I guess. Is that really what he did, though? Courts have thus consistently and repeatedly held that allegedly defamatory statements made in that context are within the scope of the elected official's employment, including when the statements were prompted by press inquiries about the official's private life. So I guess just by way of illustrating how their, what do we say here, how their stance, institutionally speaking, could be understandable in other circumstances. Again, looking ahead to say, I don't know, Joe Biden criticizing the position of certain conservatives, either in some legal proceeding or whatever, and on some policy issue or the way somebody handled themselves even in their private affairs, which would reflect on their policy goals in some way, and speaking in or putting their position in a negative light. And Judicial Watch were then to say, oh, well, this is, you have grounds to sue Joe Biden for defamation. And the defense would be, well, now, speaking to the public and the press on matters of public concern is undoubtedly part of an elected official's job. Yes, President Biden was functioning as president when he said that the conservative position on, on immigration was damaging and hurtful and possibly racist. Racist? Why, that's defamatory. And they would sue, and you would say, well, no, look, the courts have long recognized that the president has the right to comment on public affairs like this and to disagree vehemently, and you can't be bogging down the presidency in defamation suits, or we'll be here all the time. Yes, right. But doesn't it seem to you like a simple thing to differentiate between, hey, that's a bad position on immigration, and I think it's because they're opposed to them on a racist basis. They're being racist here. You can't have that. Can you differentiate between that and this woman, she makes up this garbage. I never touched her. She's not even my type. She's so ugly. I can't stand her. Why would anybody have sex with her? That's horrible. It's a terrible thought. I can't even think about it. She's such a liar. We hate her guts. They should kill her. All this sort of, whatever it is he was blurting out. But it was basically just I don't know. I'm sure he limited himself to some extent to she's lying, she's making it up. But he also very frequently, I don't remember what the comments that he made offhand now that I think about it, but he very frequently resorts to, well, she's not my type anyway, as though that had anything to do with it. It's a fairly disgusting misunderstanding of the whole thing, but okay. And then the question was, well, it's one thing for the president to say, I categorically deny these charges, and I don't know why she's doing this, but it's not true, and it's all made up. And I think that's well within the scope of what you can allow a president to say, but when it gets to being personally disparaging, that's where you start to wonder whether, could that possibly be part of an elected official's actual job? And their position is, it could be. And so for maximum flexibility, let's say it is, and now they find themselves defending it. The new brief amounts to a Biden administration ratification of the move that then Attorney General William Barr made last year to assume Trump's defense in the case. And that's another aspect of what's going on here. In addition to defending the maximum power and flexibility of the executive branch, there was also the question of, well, if you're going to turn it into a question of whether or not it's part of the president's prerogatives to do this, and therefore deputize the Department of Justice to do the defense work, you're really just federalizing a personal case. Your personal attorneys should be defending you at your expense from this defamation suit. But the idea of claiming that it's within the scope of the president's duties is a way of bootstrapping a free taxpayer covered defense to, so that you don't have to pay for your own defense lawyers. You can make the Department of Justice do it. And I guess that's being adopted too. How fantastic. So, yes, it amounts to a ratification of Barr's move made last year to assume Trump's defense in the case, a move that drew widespread criticism over the deployment of government attorneys to fight the defamation suit that Carroll filed after Trump denied her account of the alleged rape. But the more significant impact of Barr's move was that if successful, it would almost certainly have scuttled the litigation. A Justice Department spokesperson declined to comment on which department leaders made the decision to stay the course in the Carroll suit, but a spokesperson for the White House said it played no role in the decision and emphasized that President Joe Biden had set a new standard. This is in active litigation, so we refer you to the Department of Justice concerning its court filings. White House spokesperson Andrew Bates said the White House was not consulted by DOJ on the decision to file this brief or its contents. While we are not going to comment on this ongoing litigation, the American people know well that President Biden and his team have utterly different standards from their predecessors for what qualifies as acceptable statements. That's probably true. Carroll's lead attorney, Roberta Kaplan, said she was disturbed by the Biden administration's decision to back Trump in the case. It is horrific that Donald Trump raped E. Jean Carroll in a New York City department store many years ago, Kaplan said, but it is truly shocking that the current Department of Justice would allow Donald Trump to get away with lying about it, thereby depriving our client of her day in court. The DOJ's position is not only legally wrong, it is morally wrong, since it would give federal officials free license to cover up private sexual misconduct by publicly brutalizing any woman who has the courage to come forward. Carroll responded angrily to the development. As women across the country are standing up and holding men accountable for assault, the DOJ is trying to stop me from having the same right. I am angry. I am offended, she said in a statement. Last October, U.S. District Court Judge Lewis Kaplan rejected the government's motion to essentially step into Trump's shoes as the defendant in Carroll's suit. At least there's that. The Justice Department appealed that decision, asking the Second Circuit to overrule Kaplan. In January, DOJ lawyers even filed a brief early in an apparent bid to cement the government's position before Biden's appointees took over. The brief, due on Monday night, was the first from the Justice Department in the case since Biden's inauguration. Judge Kaplan said the actions that precipitated the suit, Trump's recent denials of Carroll's rape claims from the 1990s, were not related to Trump's job as president and did not amount to official business. The judge also said the president was not covered by the law the Justice Department wielded to jump into the case. Allowing the government to assume the role of defendant in the suit likely would have doomed Carroll's case, since the law does not allow libel claims against federal officials acting in their official capacity. In that event, Ms. Carroll would have been left with no remedy, even if the president's statements were false and defamatory, Kaplan wrote. Justice Department lawyers pointed to a series of other cases in which questions of personal affairs, or rather questions of a personal nature, raised with federal officials or statements they made were deemed related to their work, but Kaplan said those cases were wrongly decided or not comparable. The undisputed facts demonstrate that President Trump was not acting in furtherance of any duties owed to any arguable employer when he made the statements at issue. Kaplan wrote, his comments concerned an alleged sexual assault that took place several decades before he took office, and the allegations have no relationship to the official business of the United States. To conclude otherwise would require the court to adopt a view that virtually everything the president does is within the public interest by virtue of his office. And I think there are probably plenty of judges ready to do that. We'll see whether any of them are on the Second Circuit panel here. Kaplan's 61-page opinion permitted the suit brought by Carroll, who has, wait a minute, Kaplan? Is that not... Okay, that's the judge, not the lawyer. I'm sorry, I was confusing the two of them. But okay. Yes, so Kaplan's decision, where do we leave off on that? Right, his 61-page opinion permitted the suit brought by Carroll, who has accused Trump. Well, we all know about what the accusation is. Let's see. By the way, in case you're wondering the name of the department store, Bergdorf Goodman, in where this happened. And Kaplan allowed the case to continue in federal court with Justice Department attorneys representing Trump. Trump's personal lawyers also filed a brief on Monday. He's double covered in this, urging the appeals court to reject Kaplan's decision. In 2019, Trump issued several sharp denials of Carroll's account, including a written statement in which he insisted he'd never met her, despite a photo that she has of the two together. She is trying to sell a new book. That should indicate her motivation. It should be sold in the fiction section, one Trump statement said. He also denied her account in an exchange with reporters on the White House South Lawn before boarding Marine One and in an Oval Office interview with the Hill newspaper. Trump also declared of Carroll, she's not my type. The Justice Department's new brief opens by declaring that its legal defense of Trump should not be seen as an endorsement of his statements. Then President Trump's response to Ms. Carroll's serious allegations of sexual assault included statements that questioned her credibility in terms that were crude and disrespectful, Boynton and other DOJ lawyers wrote, but this case does not concern whether Mr. Trump's response was appropriate, nor does it turn on the truthfulness of Ms. Carroll's allegations. Well, it goes on at some length from here. Begin to wind up. Let me see what other interesting facts we can glean from this if we skip over a little bit here. The department sought to have the government substituted for Trump as the defendant in the case. Actually, as the defendant, based on two central arguments. One, that Trump is a federal employee and that his statements denying Carroll's allegations were made as part of his official job responsibilities. That would have been number two there. Those factors would trigger long-standing statutes that permit the Justice Department to intervene and defend against civil litigation. Justice Department attorneys also pointed to a 2006 D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals decision that accepted arguments from lawyers for former Representative Cass Ballinger, Republican of North Carolina, that a press interview he gave about his separation from his wife was within the scope of his official duties. In the exchange, Ballinger said one reason for the separation was that his wife was uncomfortable living across the street from the offices of the Council on American Islamic Relations, which he called the fundraising arm for Hezbollah. Oh my goodness. The group sued Ballinger for slander, but the courts ultimately agreed that the congressman was seeking to preserve his official reputation when he addressed the question about his marriage. Under Barr, the Justice Department pitched its move as a way to effectively end Carroll's lawsuit. A department spokesperson at the time, Kerry Kupich, remember her, tweeted on September 10th that it was a, quote, myth to suggest that the Justice Department's involvement in the case would put taxpayers on the hook for funding the Carroll defamation lawsuit, defending, I guess I should have said really, but for funding the Carroll lawsuit. Fact, once the case shifts to federal court, it becomes an issue of sovereign immunity, she wrote, meaning case over, no case, no cost. Well, I guess that hasn't worked out. The Second Circuit has yet to schedule oral arguments on the appeal, and of course, if you're appealing the question of whether or not there's no case, well, then there's costs. So it was a stupid argument to begin with. All right, well, that's semi-infuriating, if not fully infuriating. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too light about it. But, at least the second story inside of the space of a week or two where I've been surprised to see the Biden Justice Department not doing anything to differentiate between the Trump administration and every other administration in terms of how it will go about handling cases carrying over from the previous administration. I've explained, to the extent I'm able to, why it's ordinarily not surprising to see a successor administration, even one that has fought a bitter campaign against the previous administration, defending the previous administration's positions in court. But I think at some point there's a responsibility from the Biden administration to set the Trump administration apart from all other, from 44 other administrations that preceded it. And this, the 46th president's administration, as something different in kind and seeking to set it apart and to, let them be the ones making Bush v. Gore type filings and saying this stands entirely alone and outside of the usual network of or system of precedent established by the courts for how it treats the executive branch, because this was a hostile occupation of the executive branch by an organized crime group rather than any ordinary continuance of the executive branch of the government of the United States. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. And but they would have some time and the opportunity and resources to make that call and make that argument, and they're just not doing it, and it's a little bit disturbing to say the least. Okay, let's see. Other things to look at, some smaller, shorter pieces perhaps that we can fit in before the break, before circling back around to some of the longer stuff. I just was interested in a tweet from Benji Sarlin the other day, which I guess came in response to Trump commenting on Democratic efforts to get around the filibuster, specifically, of course, Sinema and Manchin filibustering the motion to proceed to, or agreeing to continue, or that is anyway, in not helping the Democratic caucus put an end to the Republican filibuster of motion to proceed to the January 6th commission consideration. But Trump defending Republicans and saying, look, this is the right thing to do, and it's a good thing they have this filibuster, and they're using it properly in preventing this sham from going forward, because everyone knows that we were all a bunch of patriots and we did nothing wrong whatsoever on January 6th or any other day for that matter. And Benji Sarlin just sort of pointing out, as he says here, you'll never guess what Trump's position on the filibuster was the entire time he was president, and including 4 screen grabs, because that's all you can include in one tweet, but he probably could have gone for several tweets. A couple of headlines like Trump calls for end to filibuster, says Senate Republicans, quote, look like fools. Trump wants the Senate to get rid of the filibuster. Good luck with that, was I guess one of the analysis pieces and adding the headline there. Trump calls for end to filibuster, and Trump to GOP, dump the filibuster before Schumer does. Something of a familiar argument. He goes on to say, by the way, in response to the responses he'd fielded from others, were saying, well, everyone flip-flops on the filibuster, and that's kind of true. He goes on to say lots of senators do, but some of its biggest critics on the left were surprisingly eager to see Trump taking up the case, especially ones outside of government. 2 screen grabs here, one from Jonathan Chait in December of 2018. Trump wants to end the filibuster. He's right. And Donald Trump is right. Senate Republicans should kill the filibuster, according to the headline on Dylan Matthews' piece from July of 2017. So that of some interest, of course. Also of some interest, I guess we could spend some time, well, at least I'll point you to the discussion. Bill Scher has been tweeting a number of interesting historical looks back at the filibuster and challenges to it. And in particular, I guess he's been interested in, I guess the bumper sticker for it would be WWRBD. What would Robert Byrd do in this situation? Apparently, a lot of argument on Twitter yesterday about what Robert Byrd might do in this situation, because he was a pretty staunch defender of the filibuster, and of course, Manchin occupies his seat in the Senate. And some, I guess, were probably looking for the opportunity to argue that this was a continuation of the Byrd legacy. Although, I will say, speaking to Robert Byrd about anything, parliamentary, of course, really just about anything, but certainly about the filibuster and parliamentary rules in the Senate, is, let's say, a different experience than talking to Joe Manchin about it. But there was some real interesting historical explorations of Byrd's view of the filibuster, of rules change, of the procedure, the process of rules change. And I gathered yesterday that a lot of it was sort of aimed at the idea that Byrd, while he embraced some changes and reforms in the filibuster and similar surrounding rules, never endorsed the idea of making that change by simple majority vote. that he fought hard and brought things around sometimes to compromises, but compromises that were adopted under regular order. And under regular order, according to the standard written rules, is that they would receive a 2/3 vote, or would require a 2/3 vote on any cloture motions, since you would be looking to invoke cloture on a motion to change the standing rules of the Senate. And that still requires, according to the written rules, a 2/3 vote rather than just a 3/5 vote. 67 votes in a full Senate versus 60. Although I think that there were parts of the Byrd legacy that were maybe not given as much attention as they should have been. Although it looks like Bill's continuing series of tweets on this has perhaps spent some time diving into some of those things. But when Byrd became majority leader first in the 70s and then again in the 80s. Well, I'll put it this way. Someone was asking on Twitter, if anybody can think of historical examples of arguments that made sense to Byrd, that persuaded him to change the rules by majority vote. I'd love to see it, because I guess they were thinking of in 1975 when they actually changed the threshold for the filibuster for most legislation from 67 votes, from 2/3 down to 3/5. Again, he was a staunch defender of leaving the status quo, and he fought very hard. And once they finally did make the change, part of the compromise he proposed and won was an insistence that, all right, we see your point, and we will make this change, but let's do so by first invoking cloture by a 2/3 vote, so that the rules aren't offended. We're going to change our votes. We see that you have a point about how you want to change the filibuster rules and in what ways, and we'll agree with you it's time to make those changes, but let's do so according to the rules. Differing interpretations about whether that was him forcing everyone else's hands, or whether that was him recognizing the writing on the wall but begging for a chance to redeem himself. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Might as well dive into this. It's a very long thread that Bill Scherer has put together here, but I think it serves some purpose, and perhaps in setting us up for some discussion about the filibuster if Joan is interested in going there. And it would eat up her entire segment to discuss this part of it, so maybe we do it by way of background. He started this almost a full day ago, 21 hours ago, Bill tweeting out some major, with asterisks around it, because that's how major it is. Some major historical context is missing here. He's tweeting Greg Sargent and Greg Sargent's discussions, I guess, with Ira Shapiro, former counsel to Robert Byrd. Maybe that's where we should start. Greg saying, Ira Shapiro, former counsel, tells me that if Manchin supported lowering the filibuster threshold to 55, it would be consistent with Byrd's legacy. Byrd backed lowering it from 67 to 60, of course, back in 1975. That would be consistent with Manchin's principles as well, is his argument, and he puts that forward in a piece that he links to. Just to let you know where we are here, this is a piece from yesterday. How Joe Manchin's awful new stance could blow up in his face. I mean, it's the sort of thing that makes you want to read it just based on the headline. But he grabs a couple clips from it, saying in his CBS appearance, Manchin hailed the 7 brave Republicans in the Senate who voted for the January 6th commission and said that this suggests that Democrats can still get 10 Republicans to vote for the John Lewis bill, which it really doesn't. But when that doesn't happen, couldn't Manchin then support, say, lowering the threshold for filibusters to ending filibusters to 55 Senate votes? Ira Shapiro at this point weighs in, saying that Ira, by the way, cited here again as former counsel for Byrd and the author of 2 books on the Senate, just by way of credentialing him, says that this would be consistent with Byrd's legacy. Byrd, who staged one of history's most notorious filibusters, ultimately supported lowering that threshold from 67 to 60. His nightmare scenario was a paralyzed Senate, Shapiro told me. Speaking of Byrd, he would have explored any possibility that allowed the Senate to get the work of the nation done. Lowering the threshold is consistent with what he'd supported in the past. To be clear, 55 senators will never support the For the People Act, but it's at least conceivable they might support the John Lewis measure, and lowering the threshold would be worth doing if it's all Manchin will ever do. That's from Greg Sargent's piece from yesterday, and that's where we start with Bill Scher saying of this piece that there's major historical context missing, that Byrd backed the compromise lowering the cloture threshold to 60 for legislation while keeping it at 67 for rules changes. Byrd voted against a nuclear option attempt, which would be needed to lower the threshold to 55. And then he begins with, I guess, the triggering phrase, story time, and ellipses, and then he goes to tell the story. I read through some of the story, and the story has twists and turns, and I think Bill actually follows some of those twists and turns as others give him feedback on the story he's telling at story time. But at the outset, I will tell you this. There are different interpretations, let's say, of how Byrd came to this conclusion in 1975. And the one uppermost in Bill Scher's mind is one I would dispute. But let's get to it before disputing it. In February of 1975, Bill then tweets, a bipartisan coalition led by Walter Mondale and James Pearson proposed lowering cloture to 60 across the board. That is 3/5 across the board for everything. That's true. He uses by way of reference here, I guess this is this one of his own pieces or no? Let's see. No, this a 2019 piece from James Wallner in legislativeprocedure.com. And I think we've read from there before. Anyway, Bill continues, they tried to get around the 67 vote cloture threshold through a, quote, nuclear option maneuver, though it wasn't called that, blowing past cloture and overruling a point of order by simple majority. Yes, that is true. And they did it, and it worked. And here's where things begin to differ, right? Senate Majority Leader Mike Mansfield raised that point of order. He lost the vote, though, 51-42. Byrd voted with Mansfield against the nuclear option. And then he gives some references here. Fun fact, Biden also sided with Mansfield, but didn't vote in a live pair move. That is, there was somebody else was absent from the Senate and who took the opposite position, and they used to have those things, the live pairing of votes, so you could go on the record as expressing an opinion but not voting in a way that you were fair to other senators who were absent. And by the way, there were a lot of senators absent for these votes, which were very important votes. And that's one of the things that, you know, pisses me off these days about how these votes go. And I'd like to see, I've suggested a small procedural change. Changes no rules, doesn't require anything to do, and doesn't even require you to win the vote, but would start requiring that people show up or pay some consequences if they don't show up to vote on these questions. Anyway, but Bill has said here, right, Senate Majority Leader Mansfield raised a point of order against what Mondale and Pearson were trying to do, but he lost the vote. But the nuclear option, it says, was quickly undone. As the New York Times reported at the time, they were all set for the knockout punch when Senator Jim Allen discovered a parliamentary flaw in their strategy, which he did, but which was itself overcome, not all that quickly, but eventually. But this doesn't really get discussed in the New York Times piece or in Bill's initial tweets here. He won the vice president's ruling that the debate, and thus the possibility of extended debate, was permitted on part of the reform proposal. That is, the way Pearson and Mondale phrased their reform motion. As I recall, he won a ruling from the vice president that the question posed in their motion was compound and that they could divide the question, and that part of it was debatable and therefore subject to the filibuster, and he was going to filibuster their motion to do away with the filibuster. And he did try to do that. Now, it goes on to say, this is why the nuclear option did not become precedent at this time. Sort of, because it kind of did, but never had to because, of course, it was always your constitutional prerogative anyway. But I think there's some, as Bill says at the beginning, major historical context missing here. I think there's some major historical context missing here too, which is difficult to deal with because this is a 1975 contemporaneous write-up in the New York Times about it. And the challenge might be, well, how could there be major historical context missing from the historical context? And the answer is, when have you ever seen regular mainstream journalists, even the New York Times, cover an issue of that complexity with the nuance truly required to actually convey what happened here correctly, such that readers come away with the ability to explain that nuance themselves in further conversation? And the answer is never. And that's why you have radio shows like this one that can do things like this. Because it tends to leave behind impressions like the one picked up here by Bill Scher that the nuclear option didn't become precedent at this time. Okay. Soon after, the Democratic and Republican leaderships, which included Byrd as majority whip, came up with the compromise. Cloture would be reduced to 60, and again, it's not reduced to 60, it's reduced to 3/5. That makes a difference. But cloture reduced to 60 for legislation, keeping it at 67 for rules changes. Yes, that was part of the compromise, but it wasn't the crux of the compromise. Cloture, he goes on to say, was invoked for that compromise with a 73-21 vote and a final vote of 56-27. But by the way, pay close attention to those numbers. 73-21 is the cloture vote. That's 73, 94 of 100 senators present and voting for something fairly significant. And then on final passage, 56-27. So what's that? 56, 66, 76, 86, 83. 83 of 100 senators showed up to vote on the actual passage of the rules change. That's pretty amazing too. And again, it reminds you a little bit of how many senators did versus didn't show up on the question of cloture for the January 6th commission bill. Only 89 there. And again, if you don't show up for the vote, there should be consequences. They should have immediately appealed the ruling of the chair there. And if people want to come dashing back in because they're dozing in the cloakroom, fine. But if they've left town for a week, you lose. You snooze / leave town, you lose. And there are serious consequences for that. If you don't want that to happen, then do stick around. Take a nap in the cloakroom if you prefer that to actually debating. But don't leave town. Anyway, Bill goes on to say, so the reduction of cloture from 60 to 55 in and of itself would not violate Byrd's principles or Manchin's principles, but not, period, by, period, nuclear, period, option, period. You see, he's saying, okay, Byrd might agree to lower the threshold to 55, but only if you could get 2/3 of the Senate present and voting. That's what the rules still say with regard to that. But if you could get them to 67 or 2/3 of those present and voting to agree to invoke cloture on a rules change proposal, then we would be okay lowering it from 60 to 55. But again, I'm not so sure. And before we even go any further on that, I would say this accounting of how the change went down in 1975 is disputed. The Gold-Gupta article, and I guess, you could say, well, there's some motivated reasoning in the Gold-Gupta article. They are arguing in favor of the use of the nuclear / constitutional option. That's true. But their accounting of it is a lot more thorough and detailed and nuanced than what the New York Times offered in 1975. And we've kind of been over this history, actually, a couple of times. And, well, I don't know. Maybe we should call it up and read directly from the article again, just by way of refresher here because, you probably don't remember it from there. I got to go down to what page here. It's a long article. And you may remember I'm quoting here from the constitutional option to change Senate rules and procedures, a majoritarian means to overcome the filibuster, written again by Martin Gold and Dimple Gupta, published in 2004 in, the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy, I believe. But yeah, let's see. So let's see. Down here in the 1975, begins on page 252. Not the whole article isn't that long. It's just that it was not the first article in that that edition of the journal. You get the idea. Anyway, but in the PDF, I got to get to page 252 here, and this will explain a little more in depth what actually went on here. It's presented in Bill's telling, and because it's presented that way in the New York Times telling, that Mansfield prevails here, that the preservers of the filibusters are the ones who really prevail in this, and I don't think that that's an accurate read of what's going on. Skipping down to the final series of votes here. We have this. Let's see. Maybe I need to skip down a little further to get towards the end here. Mansfield's... Okay. All right, so here we are. We'll begin here and say, all right, so Mansfield's point of order is tabled 5142, right? This would mark, as they put it, the first of 3 times in 1975 that the Senate would go on record supporting the constitutional option. For supporters of Mondale's 3/5 proposal, this success was to be short-lived. So we do see that reflected in the New York Times reporting. Before Rockefeller could put Pearson's cloture procedure for an immediate vote, Senator Allen called for its division. Allen argued that the first part of the motion, that is, moving to proceed to consider the 3/5 cloture proposal, was divisible from the second part, that is, that no debate shall be in order, and the first part, not raising any constitutional question, was debatable. Rockefeller, the Senate president, vice president of the U.S. at the time, ruled in Allen's favor, as mentioned by the Times and by Bill, allowing debate on the first part of Pearson's motion. The filibuster reformers were back to square one. Allen and his allies filibustered the proposal, holding the floor until the Senate adjourned at the end of the day. That adjournment served to kill Pearson's motion. On February 24th, Senator Mondale offered a new self-executing cloture procedure. Mondale moved that 1. The Senate take an immediate vote on his cloture procedure with no intervening debate, motions, or amendments, and 2. Upon adoption of his cloture procedure, the Senate take an immediate vote on whether to proceed to consideration of the underlying proposal for 3/5 cloture reform. Mansfield again raised the point of order, and Mondale again moved to table it, thus setting the stage for a replay of the February 20th vote affirming the constitutional option. Allen, however, interrupted the proceedings with an extraordinary series of parliamentary tactics, including live quorum calls, motions to recess, roll calls on motions to recess, motions to reconsider previous roll calls, points of order, and appeals of points of order. When the Senate was finally able to vote, because eventually you just ran out of tactics and things to do and support for doing it, because there was still essentially a talking filibuster at that stage for a question like this anyway. When they were finally able to vote, the Senate tabled Mansfield's point of order again. 48-40, by the way. You didn't actually need to produce 50 or 51, just a majority of those present and voting. And again, there are only 88 at the time. Thus, Gold and Gupta point out, the Senate endorsed the constitutional option for a second time in 1975. And again, Allen remains undeterred. He launches into a new series of delaying tactics, including motions to recess, motions to postpone, live quorum calls, points of order, and lengthy speeches prolonged by questions from his allies. This finally ended on February 26th. But you see this goes on for days here, right? Almost a full week of this particular part of the fight. And this started in early January. Mansfield raised a third point of order against Mondale's cloture procedure, this time arguing that the motion improperly precluded debate, intervening motions, and amendments. The vice president submitted the issue to the Senate for decision, and the Senate, again, tabled the point of order, 46-43. Thus, the Senate endorsed the constitutional option for a third time in 1975. After this third defeat, Mansfield, and Byrd along with him as his deputy, agreed to compromise. On February 28th, Byrd introduced a compromise proposal forged by the majority and minority leaders, allowing cloture by 3/5 of all senators instead of 3/5 of senators present and voting, as Pearson and Mondale had proposed, and we saw how that affects things just the other day. The conservative bloc, however, feared that future senates would regard the 3 tabling votes as precedent for allowing a simple majority to cut off debate and force a vote. And indeed, they did. They do. So what did they do about it? The Senate addressed this concern by agreeing that Senator Roman Hruska, Republican of Nebraska, could move to reconsider the Senate's third February 26th tabling vote. Not the first 2, but the third one. Now, on the path to reform instigated by the constitutional option on March 3rd, the Senate voted 53-38 to reconsider the tabling vote, and then voted 40-51 to defeat the underlying motion to table. On March 5th, the Senate sustained Mansfield's underlying point of order against the Mondale motion, 53-43. But this, of course, was part of the agreement to go ahead and vote on Mondale's proposal to change the actual standing Senate rules anyway, regardless, and that they would provide the necessary 2/3 for cloture so that they could get past that point. People who had opposed cloture before, like Byrd, were now saying, I will now support cloture so that we can make the change that you will be able to make even without me, but we'll make it my way. This is face saving, is what's going on here. So, in other words, Bill Scher's telling of it and the New York Times telling of it is that Byrd stood firm on his insistence that rules change be done under regular order and would always feel the same way and would therefore oppose the use of the nuclear option today to lower the threshold to 55, though he might very well accept changing it to 55 as long as any cloture motions necessary were invoked by the vote of 2/3 of the senators present and voting. It's not an unreasonable supposition. He would certainly want to go that way first, but it's not conclusive. And not this episode nor the rest of Byrd's history, especially his history as majority leader later on. The alternative telling, as Golden Gupta put it here, what's really happening is Byrd is recognizing that if they're forced to fight it out and don't reach some sort of compromise, pardon me, and the compromise at that point had to include his guarantee of delivering the necessary 2/3 vote for cloture if they went this route. Basically, the two parties sit down and he says, look, I want this thing done by regular order. I want there to be a 2/3 vote on cloture. And Mondale says, look, I don't need you. 3 times we've had this tabling vote, and I've won 3 times. I can invoke the nuclear option over your head right now. What is it about what you're proposing that should make me want to agree to bring this under regular order at this point? And all that Byrd can offer is to say, well, I can guarantee you the votes to do it. And we'll feel a lot better if we do things this way. And they're both Democrats. And Mondale says, so what you're telling me is, at the end of the day, I'm going to get the rules change I want enshrined in the rules the way I want it. And I can either do it by forcing my way past you and pissing you off, or agreeing to watch you change your position because I have you over a barrel, and then do it your way. And essentially that's it. That's all there was to it. And Byrd presumably at this point says, yeah, that's exactly what I mean, because you've won this vote 3 times now. You don't need me, but I'm asking you to include me instead. And by the way, I have one small change to make to the 3/5 thing. It should be 3/5 of those duly chosen and sworn. Now, that's a huge mistake, but he went with it. I don't know whether that was out of deference to Byrd or part of the agreement, or he didn't really think very hard about what that might have meant, or I don't know. But he agreed to it for whatever reason. Mondale and Pearson did. But the telling that Cher is giving this, and some of the other people associated with Byrd, I guess Ira, whoever it was, Shapiro, did I have the name right? Because there's two Iras floating around in this scenario, both of whom I think worked with, or if not for, Byrd at the time. Anyway, what they're saying is that, no, Byrd actually forced the Senate to come around to seeing it his way, that the change really ought to be done under regular order. And that's one way of looking at it. But another way of looking at it is Mondale won this question 3 times and said, look, I'm sorry, Bob, but this change is happening with you or without you. And it was at that point that the position that changed initially was Byrd's. Byrd said, no, I oppose this change in the cloture rules. I just do. And I oppose the procedure by which you're proposing to do it. But I will change my mind, and I will provide you the votes that you need to make this change, so long as the change is done with my procedure and not yours. Pardon me. And Mondale at that point says, you know what, to hell with it. Let's get this done. We've been fighting this battle since the first day of the new Congress, back on January 3rd or so. It's now March. Like, okay, let's get this done. So those are two very different interpretations of things. Well, I'm okay with changing the cloture rules so long as we change them my way. I'm not so sure that that's what he was concluding. It was, I'm over a barrel. This thing is going to happen. How do I know that? Why do I come to that conclusion? All right, well, there's more in this article, and let's see if we can cram it in before our next break. So, now on the path, as we said before, to reform instigated by the constitutional option. On March 3rd, the Senate votes 53-38 to reconsider the tabling motion. Remember, Hruska says, we have a lot of conservative members here who are afraid that the 3 tabling motions will stand as precedent. That means that you can do this again in the future. And it would. It did. But also, well, you'll see. Some contended, okay, so on March 5th, the Senate sustained Mansfield's underlying point of order. They reversed themselves on the 3rd tabling motion and said, phew, now there's no precedent for being able to table a point of order against majority cloture, and if you lose it, thereby invoking cloture by majority and establishing a precedent for it in the future. Now, some contended that this reversed any precedent in favor of the constitutional option. Hruska probably thought so, but he was famously not that great at things like this. So he said, well, we reversed the 3rd one. That stands to erase the 1st one and the 2nd one as well. Now, others argued that the February 20th and February 24th precedents for majority cloture were still effective. Now, who says that? People who are big fans of it, Mondale himself, yeah, that still stands as precedent. No, it's the biggest opponent of it, James Allen. He's so worried about the fact that those 2 other votes stand that he actually brings this up and says we should reverse all 3, but they don't do it. But in making the argument that they should, he's saying, well, the February 20th and 24th votes are still there. How come they're not precedent? They should be. They are. Logically, they are. We should get rid of them. And then they don't. He loses, and they don't get rid of them. But he's already just spent the whole day saying, well, if we don't get rid of them, then they stand as precedent. And he was the biggest opponent of the whole thing. So guess what? They stand as precedent. The end. Allen later fears that the conservative bloc will continue to, Allen feared that the latter was correct and cited this as reason for members of the conservative bloc to continue to resist the rules change. Well, anyway, at that point, they go ahead, they vote, they do it Hruska's way, and the other 2 votes stand on the record. And Byrd himself comes back at that point. We'll have to continue this probably with a little bit of Jones time, but Byrd himself comes back and says, look, Byrd argued that the conservatives had no choice. If they did not endorse the quote-unquote moderate compromise proposal, a different kind of result would ultimately but surely eventuate majority cloture. What Byrd is saying here is if you don't adopt my compromise, the only possible interpretation of this outcome is that majority cloture is now the rule. That was his thinking on it. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right. Well, welcome back, everybody else, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Joan McCarter now joins us. We're talking about, at the moment we're talking about what are we going to talk about. So we have that. But I guess Manchin and the filibuster are still very much on the agenda for you. I will just quickly sum up so we can get to that discussion. Again, reiterating, I'm disputing the historical view that Robert Byrd would have absolutely opposed the use either of the nuclear option or something like it to make the rules change. And I guess Bill Scher comes around to the view that he might very well have endorsed a 55 cloture threshold, or even lowering it to majority cloture. I guess at some point it's not out of the question. It's just that he disputed the procedure by which the change was made. But it's pretty shaky ground, honestly, for making that argument, considering that, even the biggest opponents of making the change that way in 1975 ended up saying, yeah, I guess we've kind of validated that. And Byrd himself says, look, it's either I switch my vote and other opponents switch our votes because the proponents of the nuclear option have us over a barrel. They've won this fight 3 times over now, and they're just going to win it a 4th time and ram this thing through with or without us. So if we want to have any say whatsoever, we have to change our vote on cloture here. And then if we do that, do them that favor and end this months-long fight, they'll do us the honor of saying, all right, fine. 60 or 3/5 of those duly chosen and sworn for legislation, and we'll keep 67 for rules change if that's going to make you change your cloture vote. And that's the way they worked it out, and they did it. But there's more evidence that maybe we'll go over tomorrow. But Byrd, later on, when he becomes majority leader, doesn't change the cloture threshold this way, but he does a lot to eliminate abuses of the filibuster and removes the ability of anyone to filibuster all sorts of important procedural motions, and he does it by majority vote. He does it by the exact same mechanism that it is said in 1975 New York Times coverage and said by Bill Scher and historians later that he opposed using. But he did it. And he did it a lot in 1977, in 1979, in 1981. He did it over and over again. So,
you saw a real evolution in his thinking on how the Senate worked.
Yes.
And I think, at the very end, he was horrified by what Mitch McConnell was doing.
Yes, that's, I think, really the biggest part of the conclusion. You probably saw a discussion of that, and you've seen it before.
Yeah. And I think, he would have said, we've got to stop this man. We will do it by whatever means we can. I mean,
Right.
because when it comes to being a true institutionalist, when it comes to truly caring about how the Senate functioned, that's what Byrd was.
Yes.
That's not what McConnell is.
Yeah, no, totally
as
different.
much as people have been trying to say that about him.
Yeah, and I guess if you really wanted to save what they were saying about it, I mean, you could if you were pro McConnell, and we're not, you could say, well, maybe there's different kinds of institutionalists. There's institutionalists who just say, I just want the rules to stay the same forever and no change in that. And then there's institutionalists like Byrd who say, my concern is that the institution should work.
Right.
And that's totally
this place
different.
needs to function.
Yeah. And, for someone who's an arch conservative like McConnell, no, it doesn't need to function. That way we won't be able to pass anything, and that's good. That's actually bad. So, totally different.
On the other hand, how much does the historical record count when it's clear that neither Manchin nor Sinema are paying any attention at all to the
right. Well, see,
history
that's
of
the
this
ultimate
thing?
part of it. And that's kind of why I decided not to even take part in the discussion for the most part yesterday, as whether it was Bill Scherer's part of it or others. I was like, who cares? I mean, in the end, I could argue this all day long, and what are Manchin's going to read it and say, interesting historical point, I concede. No, of course not.
Despite the fact that people have been screaming at them, look at the Jim Crow roots of this thing. Look at the white supremacy behind this thing. Just spend a little time to understand exactly what it is that you're defending. And neither he nor Sinema seems to have grasped that part of it.
None of it works. And I don't know. Even the rest of it doesn't work. Like, just plain, if you want to leave that part out of it for whatever reason, just, where's the bipartisanship that you said this fosters? I mean, it's here. Right. Where's the bipartisanship? It's supposed to be a causal relationship. You said so.
Right now, as we speak, actually, the meeting might be over because it was 8 o'clock Eastern time.
What are they, crazy? Too early.
Manchin was meeting with leaders, prominent black leaders from the NAACP, Reverend Al Sharpton, various other groups, so they can try to get through to him what precisely it is he's doing. He's, with his op-ed that he wrote on Sunday. That started this whole thing, or was it Saturday? Over the weekend.
Yeah.
Which, by the way,
that's enough, right?
He didn't inform leadership that he was writing. The White House didn't know he was doing it. It was just sort of a bombshell out there.
Okay.
Which is kind of a problem, because that's rankled a lot of people, apparently, according to The Hill.
I can see that.
Many see that as abrasive.
Yeah. You could come to that conclusion.
You could come to that conclusion, and, it's doing Manchin absolutely no favors for himself by going out there and winging it this way without any heads up to leadership. It's going to make folks a lot less desiring of helping him in the future, I would think, on his legislative initiatives, if he has any. I also think he's kind of lazy, so I don't know if he really does try to do anything.
I don't know how could he ever propose something? He'd have to wait for a Republican to propose it to him in order to back it.
On that score, he's been out there saying that he's got Lisa Murkowski helping him on the John Lewis Voting Rights Act as an alternative to the For the People Act.
Okay.
Which is really putting Lisa Murkowski on the spot. She's not going to be able to find 10 Republicans. She said, she told NBC News, no, I don't have them, and I think it's a heavy lift, and I don't think that they're going to be there. John Cornyn, who we last saw on the border with Kyrsten Sinema, says, in fact, this is the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which last time we passed 98-0 in the Senate. The last authorization for it, is just too controversial. We can't do it, and I am going to convince my colleagues not to. So, there you go.
So much for unanimity.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's funny.
For 10 Republicans being willing to do anything.
Yeah. Well, that's...
Even something that they all voted for in the past.
Well, they voted for it before they voted against it, which is something... I think they like that position. I think they campaigned on it. Oh, no, wait. They tore down a veteran as being a hypocritical liar for doing that. That's right. Yeah. Sorry. The opposite, I meant to say. Well, no surprise there. And interesting, too. So one, I guess just like he didn't give anybody heads up about his op-ed coming out, I guess he didn't give Murkowski a heads up like, oh, by the way, you're the whip on this. Give me the 10. He outsourced the 10 votes that he knew he could get. I can get it. I'll hire a Republican to get them for me.
Which is a problem for him as the chair of the Natural Resources Committee where Murkowski is ranking. I mean, they're essentially co-chairs because of the 50-50 split, and that's how he said he's going to approach it. So, good luck in the committee there, Joe.
I guess, yeah, that could cause some problems too. But hey, maybe she's committed to working with him because of something. But yeah, that too. I mean, I've seen that floated a lot as well. This is how we should teach him that there aren't going to be 10 votes. You say there are 10 votes, go get them. And yeah, I understand the sentiment there, but then that too, like, look, he's not going to absorb the historical lesson. He's also not going to accept your challenge that he's responsible for the 10. He's just going to say,
I would very much like to see somebody try to make him do that work.
Yeah, I don't know how, but
I don't know how either. I don't know how you make him do anything.
Right. You challenge him to do it, and he says, I'm not gonna. Oh. Crap.
But now yeah, he should be responsible for finding those 10 votes.
He should. Right. In a just world, he would be, and we don't live there. So, we'll do our best.
Yeah. I mean, what do? You say, all right, we've got this big infrastructure package coming. Do you want anything in it or not? I mean, it really is going to have to be bribery. Do you want to have a highway named after you? Do you want to have a bridge named after you? We can make that happen. Or not. Or we can make sure it never happens.
Right. I guess.
I don't know what else important.
You do. That's the traditional approach, and he's a traditionalist, so maybe it works. But I'm not sure. It just has to end up being something that he cares about. I thought for a while that we might find something he cares about if the Republicans continued to make problems and tried to block the organizing of the new Senate. And I don't know whether they just were like, well, we're not up to that, or they thought, yeah, that might actually trigger Manchin and Sinema to do something, so we better not do that. I don't know. But other than that, I mean, once he got the gavel and became an important person, I guess there wasn't much. I don't know what you can bribe him with. He might not care about anything else.
Yeah.
So it's difficult. Also on the, I guess on the Robert Byrd legacy front, I did want to mention that I guess Norm Ornstein at some point chimes in and says, to your point, as you were saying, he's changed his mind almost entirely on this thing, and certainly was clear-eyed about what Republicans were doing to the institution. Ornstein's story that he shared was that when they had to bring Byrd in, like literally from his deathbed, to cast his vote on the Affordable Care Act, that he was, as Ornstein put it, was like shaking with rage and was furious and saying, "Look look! I have to be wheeled in from my deathbed to get cloture on." Just the motion to proceed to debate on one of the most momentous things the Senate has ever considered. And they are doing it with such disingenuous, in such a disingenuous way that this is what it's come to. And this really has to stop. He was furious, but, at the end of his life and in no position to carry on that fight. So
apparently he just kept saying shame.
Yes, right.
To McConnell.
Which, it was like saying learn to Manchin.
Right.
So it's like talking to a brick wall. So, but it was an interesting story.
McConnell is incapable of shame. We've seen that.
Yeah. So that wasn't.
And apparently so is Manchin.
Yeah. Right. Well, he's standing there thinking he's doing the right thing, and people are, I don't know, I guess, I think, misreading the history of what happened in order to, to prove that that's somehow a principled approach. And that's upsetting, to say the least. And a total misunderstanding of Byrd's history as majority leader. And I mean, I don't know. I don't know why, for this guy, how could it be difficult to understand that Byrd's views evolve? How many times have we been through Robert Byrd was once in the Klan. Yeah,
well, I have noticed that Bill Shirt has a tendency to dig in on things.
He does.
Often when he's not necessarily right. So
yeah, well, many people display that.
We all do. We all do.
I guess that's true. But it was a very interesting exploration, and he did make room in the discussion yesterday for, some other people are saying some other things about this. So I certainly said, this is not something I need to get involved with there, but I do want to talk about it with you because it's relevant to what's happening today with Manchin. And I don't know. I have no solution for getting through to him other than, something he's going to want.
You can't appeal to basic decency if you can't say, look.
Yeah.
Well, and the fact that he's been there all of these years and he has seen how McConnell operates.
Yes.
He's lived it. Did he not see any of it happening? Was he just vacant?
Maybe. I don't know. It's an odd thing. I just don't understand his approach to anything at all. So I'm not going to get this.
I will say it again. I miss Ben Nelson.
Yeah, in a way.
Not Joe Lieberman.
Right,
Lieberman, though, you knew what his motivations were.
Yeah, he was
spite.
petty. Yeah,
pure spite.
And so,
you could hate that. But with Manchin, there's just no understanding what the hell it is that he's on about.
No, he's got this idea in his head, or it now reminds me of like a line from another old movie line, right, from Moonstruck. He's got this wrong idea in his head, which is basically that it's inexplicable. I saw somebody kind of approaching it the other day and saying, what's weird about what he's got in his mind is that the logical upshot of it is he'll only vote for something. I'm only going to do it if one of my friends does it. Like, that's not really a very senatorial approach to things. And to say, I'm only going to vote for things that have consensus. And if there's no consensus, it starts out by saying, well, he sounds like a guy who's a real dedicated centrist. He's only going to vote for things that have consensus. But things aren't going to ever, don't they have intrinsic value at all? Like, you have some thoughts, maybe, on whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. And the idea that consensus is a prerequisite as opposed to the result of a good bargaining process. Like, if you can get people to consensus, that's great. But how do you even get there? How do you bring people around to consensus if your opening position is, I have no opinion on it until you have an opinion on it? Like, how can you be an advocate for anything? You're just...
Well, and that's where we go back to Joe Manchin perhaps being just a bit lazy.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think that's... You hate to say that about people, but
and
not him.
Not terribly bright by most accounts.
I mean, I don't know how else to come out on it, and I don't mean to say that anybody who disagrees or can't see this point isn't very bright, but this is a very serious thing. How do you say, I cede my vote? A vote in the Senate, what a precious thing. There's only 100 of them out there to be claimed by any one of the 330 million of us. And he says, what are you going to do with your vote, Joe Manchin? I don't know. What do you want to do with it? Wow.
Pretty much.
That's it?
And Kristen Sinema, I don't know what she's wanting to do.
She won't say anything.
Wants us to keep guessing what she's going to do with her vote. That's where she finds her power.
I guess. I don't know. Yeah. It's like, very much in some ways, like all of us getting stubborn over things. They laid out a position that sounded like they were the ultimate reasonable person. I'll only, vote for things that can bring the parties together. But if you say, if there's a political situation in which the parties won't come together, what are you going to do? And their only logically consistent answer is nothing. I'm not going to do anything.
Right. And in doing so, I am giving a huge gift to one of the parties, right. The party that's being obstructionist.
If you don't want things done, then all you have to do is say, I will refuse to agree.
What they're doing is not a neutral position. They are not actually trying to broker anything between the two parties because one party refuses to play.
Yeah.
So they're ceding all of their power to that one party who's refusing to play. So, how they don't get this. The other thing that I just can't comprehend is how they don't get the power that they actually would have should the filibuster go away.
Yeah, in this particular
and the power they give
certainly.
to Lisa Murkowski and hell, Susan Collins.
I guess.
Should they decide to get rid of the filibuster or, reduce it to 55.
Yeah. And, that's now floating as a possibility, and who knows whether that's something that, for some reason, people think that that's something they can get him to. Although it's not clear because none of what he has said about his position makes any sense. So you've logically worked it out that he can support 55. Well, what if he just doesn't? Because duh.
Yeah, because he's not had a coherent rationale for anything that he's put forward on this. He hasn't absolutely said no reform, but he's not certainly given any indication that he's thought about how this works, how any of it works, and what he would like to see, what he'd be willing to do, because I guess that takes work and study and understanding the place where he works. And so far he's not been willing to do that.
Right. And I don't know. It's bad news given particularly, I want to be true to Robert Byrd's legacy. Like, don't even say that, first of all. You can't.
Yeah.
That guy, if nothing else, that guy studied the institution inside and out, always, for his entire life. And you don't care. Don't tell me that's ridiculous. Yeah, you can't uphold his legacy. Just stop. Why would you put that pressure on yourself?
Right.
Just as a self-care issue. Joe, please don't do it. All right. I don't know.
I mean, once again, I miss Ben Nelson.
It's surprising to say, I guess, but only by comparison.
He got it, and he understood how it worked.
Eventually,
and he knew, yes, he was looking out for himself. He was looking out for Nebraska. He was trying to get stuff.
And that's okay, and you can do it for West Virginia too.
But he was actually thinking about the process, and he was thinking about policy, and he was thinking about making things happen. I don't know what Manchin thinks about.
I don't know. I mean, he
Other
also
than the fact that he likes having all of these people groveling in front of him. That I think we can conclude he enjoys.
I could see that, and a lot of senators are like that. But yeah, I do feel like maybe he just came up in an era. I mean, he says he hates being in the Senate too, which is also kind of weird. Which all right, people come to that conclusion, but you haven't really done any work in a Senate that has been fully functional, so you don't really know. And maybe working in the Senate would be awesome if you guys could pass things. You might be you might even be an amazing legislator. Find out. But I'll stick with the devil I know, doing nothing. Okay,
pretty much. I mean, he got this far that way.
Yeah, I guess so. That's true. I don't know.
By being a white man who fits the bill as politician.
I guess so.
And shooting things.
Right. Well, that's always popular. Everyone loves that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Well, I don't know if there's even anything else that could possibly be occupying your time at the moment. Not that there's a shortage of things going on, but I do feel like we're going around in circles.
That big ProPublica story on the IRS and billionaire tax cheats, with a side of the millionaire tax cheats in the House of Representatives and Senate, most of whom are Republican, who have been fighting all of these years to make sure that the IRS can't actually enforce the tax code.
I see. So they stand to be raked over the coals if there's an effective IRS, and therefore can't be one?
Yeah.
Oh.
Abolish the IRS.
Okay. Sure. Why not?
There actually has been legislation put forward by Republicans to abolish the IRS. They've talked about it.
I've seen them do it, too.
Remember the whole the Tea Party thing, the big scandal that they blew up that wasn't really truly a scandal.
Oh, yes, right.
That was their excuse to say abolish the IRS.
Yeah.
And instead, they just starved it. They totally defunded it. So
yes. All right. That's where the defund thing actually started from. But somehow if you defund something as a Democrat or talk to somebody who once said they wanted to defund something. Oh, my God. Communism. We have to. And you hear that from your other Democrats. Please don't talk to those people who talk to the people who said that they talked to somebody who once said defund something, because that's bad. It's this defunding but that's the police. Yeah, well, this is the tax police. Yeah, but it's taxes. Everybody hates taxes. I don't know. Some people who kind of live on taxes.
This is how we pay the police.
Yeah. I mean, right. That's true, too. All right. You want to defund the police? End the IRS, because then nobody sends money for paying police. Oh. Well, poor people will. We can still arrange for that to happen. It's just that rich people shouldn't have to, because rich people don't need police because they don't have any things that need protecting, right? Sure. Okay. I don't know. Okay. Is that a new story out in the last day or two? ProPublica's thing?
Came out either last night or first thing this morning.
I missed this one.
The part about the billionaires having paid pretty much exactly no taxes.
Yeah. That's that's always been a problem. But,
the millionaire Congress people is an add-on that I've got from our friends at Accountability US. Is it Accountability US or I think that's what it's called.
Okay, I'll have to check all these things out here.
Accountable.us. They haven't released it yet. It's sort of an exclusive for Daily Kos.
Ooh, fun.
Just detailing the couple dozen very, very, very wealthy members of Congress who have been on this fight to keep the IRS from being able to enforce the tax code.
Well, it's consistent with their usual behavior. Aspirational. They want to be billionaires. I'm only a millionaire, but one day, if I cheat enough, I can be a billionaire, and then all of the cheating that I've done on billionaires' behalf will fall to me, and I'll rake.
It's actually kind of depressing in some ways to look and see who was it? Wayne, what's his name? Jeff Wayne, Mark Wayne,
Bruce Wayne.
The guy
Mark. The guy whose name is actually Mark Wayne.
Mullen.
Yes, that's right. Okay.
Is worth $11 million.
Wow. Well, his name alone is worth $10 million. Mark Wayne. Wow.
How does Mark Wayne have $11 million?
I have no idea. Yeah, it's amazing how many just plain, I don't know, you got to be, I guess it's self-selecting, right? A lot of people who self-fund their campaigns or can take time off because they're worth $11 million. I'll campaign for a year to be in Congress. Whereas if you are, I don't know, working as a home health care aide, right? You can't knock on doors. You're busy.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I guess that's probably what does it. Well, this is interesting. So we'll look for that in the next.
Yeah, that'll be coming up later today at Daily Kos. What else have we got? We've got fun stuff from Texas, from Hunter. Abbott declaring that Texas is 100% open and telling because freedom. Private businesses that they can't ask to prove people have received their COVID vaccine because freedom.
Yes, right. Well, why would you want to be free from the virus or healthy or anything? Yeah. All right. No surprises there from Abbott. And just like, I guess he's in competition with DeSantis.
And you'll want to read Mark Sumner on Rudy Giuliani because you always do. Because
else would you be doing?
Mark and it's Rudy.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So good alert there for everyone on those subjects. We'll look out for the exclusive angle on the tax avoidance and IRS questions later on today, perhaps? I don't want to pressure you.
Later on today, yes.
Okay. You're on schedule. Okay. Very good. I'm not the assignment desk here.
But first I have to deal with Mansion.
Okay. Well, yeah, there's not too much.
One way or another.
Yeah. There's nothing you can do but express that disappointment. And I guess we start brainstorming, continue for ways to look for to pressure him into making some kind of change or find a weak spot where he'll move forward on one thing but not another. But there's no answer to somebody who's just not taking any suggestions.
If you have any brilliant ideas, let us know.
Yeah, right. Open source this thing. Somewhere there's an answer. All right. Well, by next Tuesday, I expect to have this whole thing solved. So be prepared.
There you go.
And I'll talk to you then. Thanks for stopping by today, and we'll have our eyes out for the IRS story later today.
Absolutely.
All right. Take care. Time now for Justice Putnam to take over the mic. I'll tell you about it
from networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, guess what? He wants to talk about Joe Manchin, too, and in much the same way that we did. Other issues, the Colonial Pipeline chief executive will testify before Congress today as the Justice Department has recovered most of the money paid in that ransomware attack. I'd be very interested to figure out how that works and put that to use someday.